Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Viewers Club. My name is Megan.
My name is Tess.
And my name is Lucas. I'm gonna let you go ahead so I can.
He's gonna try and make
I'm gonna
amends
try
for
and
being
make
such
amends.
a dick.
Yeah.
Today we are doing another quote therapy session. After our ranking of the MCU, we have decided to go through every single movie and kind of explain our feelings towards them, especially the ones that are lowly ranked or just don't line up with each other. And in today, Serendipity Doodah, we are talking about Thor Ragnarok. Tessa and Lucas ranked them so low. Mine was ranked far higher. So, we're here to talk about that little disagreement. How should we start this? With Captain Marvel, we were all on the same page, and on this one, we're
slightly different.
Just you guys are different. Kind of on the same page. I'm not. So to kind of get this episode started, let's kind of just explain our general feelings towards this one. I'll go first in this case. Thor Ragnarok for me is, in my opinion, is the best Thor movie that they've ever made. It's one of the funniest movies Marvel has ever made, and I completely adore it, and I love it. I can actually put that on and just watch it on my own. I love it. It's one of my favorites of the 23 movie collection.
Cool. I'm glad.
So now you guys get to tear it apart. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that it means that much too. That's good that a movie can mean that much. I thought that it was a pile of garbage. No, I'm just kidding. I'm being too harsh. No. It's I completely understand where you're coming from. For me personally, it didn't do a whole lot for me, and I essentially thought that it was a lot of forced comedy that strayed away from the tone of Thor that I had grown accustomed to and that I enjoyed. And so for that reason, I thought that it was the worst Thor movie.
Tess?
Yeah, I'm very glad that you enjoy it, Megan.
I feel like the child in the group getting talked down to.
No,
you can think that. That's like what we're saying.
Everyone's
you can think that.
Are valid here.
You're allowed to enjoy
For me,
it.
The majority of feelings I have towards this is disappointment, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh no. Wow, that's even worse than just pure hatred.
Yeah,
disappointment.
I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
Okay. I had like I don't know if they would be like really high expectations, but I had like an idea of what kind of Thor movie this would be, like walking into the theater, and then
I 100% understand what you're saying.
The first 3 minutes is just like, okay, I think there was like an intense moment, and then it was just like jokes after joke. I'm like, what is going on? I like literally like looked around the theater and like, am I in the right one? Is this like a bonus movie or something?
Everyone else is laughing. You guys are sitting in the middle of the theater.
We're like awkward laughing.
What's wrong with these people?
Yeah, like.
I'm like, okay.
I see where you guys are coming from. It's really interesting because for me, it finally felt like they were utilizing Thor. So that's like flashback to the first two Thor movies and the two Avengers movies that he was in.
Yeah.
Personally, I think the first one, origin story, it could be whatever it wanted, but I also think they didn't really know what they were going to do with Thor. If I'm being perfectly honest, Thor himself is kind of a ridiculous character. Not in a bad way. This isn't in a bad way or anything.
You've affronted
He's
Tessa.
a ridiculous character to me because he's literally a god. And in the first one,
Mm-hmm.
he was basically the toddler of the group,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what things were.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the humor that I attached to him, you know? It's like, he's not going to know what he's doing. And then in like Thor 2 and even in the Avengers a little bit, in the Avengers, it was justified. But in Thor 2, he was way too serious for my taste.
Mm.
I felt like those jokes were the forced ones, like the one-liners that they had in there. I felt like Thor 2 had a lot of forced comedy in it that I didn't really enjoy. And it mainly comes from the perspective of, like, I feel like Thor 2 was a movie to exist just to introduce the Reality Stone. You know what I mean? Because, like, there are lines of, like, where Jane is, like, laying there getting scanned. And she's like, who do you think you are? And he's like, I'm Odin. And she's like, that's your dad. It's just like it was like, for me, Thor 2 just was the one that had missed on the humor,
which is funny because that just made me laugh harder.
Yeah.
I didn't laugh in those moments. I really didn't enjoy them, honestly, mainly because I didn't like how they were using Jane.
It might just be the way that you phrased it right now.
Yeah.
Just made me laugh.
But like, and then in the Avengers movie, his character, I felt like they didn't know what to do with him either because he's been established as a super serious one. You know, I didn't feel like there was a lot of personality given to Thor in his movies. Because the first one was an origin story, and the origin story always sets up who the character is. And then the other movies are supposed to take him away from that. And I feel like they really just took him away too quickly from that egotistical, I can do anything kind of character.
Anything you can do,
to this
I can do
noble,
better.
humble, like, I am, like, you know, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But then I think that that's what made Thor Ragnarok really enjoyable for me, because he came back to that character that we knew him to be, kind of, you know. He was a little egotistical, which is what you expect of someone who is egotistical his entire life, you know. He did change. He was changing from that egotistical character, which is what made him funny.
Right.
And, you know, that's why I really enjoyed the other one, because it felt like that was the turn they should have taken with Thor in the second movie. So that way in the third one, he could be established as more noble and humbled, you know. But I don't know. That's kind of why I enjoyed it a lot more than the other ones, but
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
thoughts.
I must be respectful. I must make amends.
You must.
And I also have a lot to say.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, and I do agree with, like, the very first Thor movie was establishing, like, who he was, and he did act like a child, like he didn't know, like, the rules of Earth, and it was an interesting first movie. I do think that the second one was my most favorite, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know why. I think it was because it was more serious, maybe. And I don't know. I kind of feel like superhero, or, like, you know, if there's, like, wars between the gods or whatever, like, I would take that more of, like, not like an epic, like, serious, like, drama or action movie. And then Thor Ragnarok was a couple 100 miles away from that. So
Yeah. Like, closer to
I
Guardians
don't
of the
know.
Galaxy.
yeah. Which isn't
Yeah.
bad, it just wasn't my favorite. Like, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Lucas?
Well, and I agree. It wasn't, you know, I don't want to, even though I ranked it really low, I don't want it to come across that it was a bad movie.
It's
Like, it wasn't just, it was an awful movie is what I really want to preface. No, because there were a lot of aspects that I did like about it, and there were things that I thought they did really well, but at the end of the day, it just didn't work for me as a story. And the funny thing is that I've heard a lot of people, more than not, which say what you said, Megan, where they expected Thor to be more like what he was in Thor Ragnarok, and like how the comedy, you know, from the Avengers is he didn't know what he was doing, and that Ragnarok was more true to what he was like in the comics and like what he was supposed to be. I've heard a lot of people say that, which is why I'm surprised that basically me and Tess, in our opinion, outnumber you in the terms of like feeling the way that we do in this podcast.
In this group.
In this group. Not in the world.
Not in the world, because the world is siding more on my side.
Yes, the world feels definitely more like you do. I think my biggest thing was that, for one, I agree with Tessa where when it does deal with this stuff, like with the gods and things that are on a more epic scale, I prefer it when they treat it more seriously. And I get treating it with comedy, and I think it could work. I think one of my biggest problems is that, all right, they could have done that, but they didn't. They didn't. They introduced it at first with the more serious tone, which I also understand and appreciate, because I think when you're dealing with something that can be like really, you know, out there, and you don't treat it with a certain level of seriousness, that it's harder for people to relate to the world and to relate to when there actually are bad moments or serious moments. But that's just me. But I think because they didn't introduce it that way, it felt like a tone shift that I wasn't ready for, and that felt abrupt and kind of a weird change from what we had already known. And even though the audiences were ready for that, and I know Marvel has a thing where, you know, like, they get their audience. They get that, okay, we don't want a Spider-Man origin story. So, you know, and they get that there have been tons of Spider-Man movies that talk about his origin.
We don't need an origin story.
We don't need
know
that.
How he got his power.
And so I think they knew that there was a large portion of their audience that was expecting Thor to be more like this. And I think they just wanted to have a movie that now put him in that role, because that's what they were going to do with him moving forward. But I personally don't think... I get why they did it, but I also disagree with doing it, because I feel like they've established it already, and so it felt like a weird shift.
I think the reason they did the shift is because of how Thor was handled around the other Avengers. Tony is the sarcastic one, and his movies range on more... on a 50-50 of comedy and seriousness, you know? Captain America's films have always been serious. There's rarely spouts of comedy. They're drama actions, you know? Hulk, they've never been able to tackle, right? Even in his... Like,
Poor Hulk.
If you've seen all of the other Hulk movies and all of his other incarnations of Hulk, they've never really been able to grapple with this character because Bruce and Hulk are two completely different people, but they have treated them as kind of the same person in the past. And I feel like Thor kind of fell closer to the way that Hulk was happening. They didn't know how to handle them because... in other god movies, like you said, in epics, gods are always treated as like top tier, like this is serious stuff. So that's what they went with first, you know? And I don't think people related to Thor very easily that way, you know? But then they're like, we've established him as this super serious one. And then they make Thor the Dark World. And they tried to do it, I think, the same formulaic way that they did Iron Man movies, where they're like, let's throw in a bunch of one-liners this time, and let's make it more, let's keep it serious, you know? And then the one-liners were kind of enjoyable. Again, for me, it felt like forced comedy in those moments. Most one-liners for me do. But I think they missed the mark because... it's really hard to explain why I think Thor is a ridiculous character.
I mean, he's the god.
Not at all.
He's the god of thunder. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not at all meant to belittle him or anything like that. But there's nothing from real world that connects him
No.
to be that serious, if that makes any sense.
No, I mean,
he lives
they're saying that
on an alien planet,
yeah.
and Thor is like super smart, which is like great, you know. But they also made it's just like they were going in two completely different directions, where he's smart but stupid at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. Which is something I didn't really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I did enjoy Ragnarok is because he's smart. He's like street smart, you know?
Yeah.
He's politically smart.
Mm-hmm.
But like in other situations, which is what I enjoyed the most, in like normal human interactions, he's kind of a thick, like, he has a thick skull.
He's
you
oblivious.
Know? He's kind of oblivious and kind of dumb, and that's what I wanted from it. I wanted him to be super serious when he needed to be.
Yeah.
You know, which is like, it's politically things, he needs to be serious. You know, he's taking on these big foes that he needs to handle. You know, I also wanted that brother relationship that Ragnarok nailed on the head for me, honestly.
Interesting.
Because in the first one, it's like they say that Loki's his brother, but they didn't really act like brothers, in my opinion. They acted like almost political adversaries for the most part.
Okay.
And in Ragnarok, I got more of that sibling rivalry, you know? I got more of that like connection and bond between these two characters more, and I think that's why it sold me on it better, because the interactions that Thor had in Ragnarok, though super super funny, were really genuine. Or like as genuine as you can be when you have a god of thunder being trapped to fight his coworker.
Right.
Who's a green monster.
Right.
So in that aspect, I feel like his relationships are more accurate, especially when it came to Bruce, because Thor had no connection to Bruce Banner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not a real solid one. I think that if anything, Thor was probably closer friends with Steve Rogers than Bruce Banner. And then to see how they brought those two together was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen. But I think that that's why, personally, I think I like Ragnarok more, is because the relationships in it felt more genuine and less...
That's interesting.
Shakespearean and dramatic and over the top, you know? Because that's what I got from the other two movies, were like dramatic and...
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as far as like the seriousness of the first two movies, I enjoy it whenever they treat things that are kind of fantastical with a serious note. Just because I personally feel like it makes the story more interesting, and it makes I personally related to a lot of the characters in those movies, even though, you know, I'm not the god of thunder. They still you know, like, it still felt like a lot of the issues they dealt with were inner conflict, that, you know, whether or not you're worthy of something. I feel like there are a lot of people that deal with that. But as far as relationships go, the reason I think that was interesting is that, yes, I loved a lot of the moments between Thor and Loki, and I liked the kind of the sibling thing that they showed, and I liked a lot of the scenes with the Hulk and Thor. I thought, one, like I talked about earlier, I thought that it was just way too much comedy. And two, I felt like they, like, made scenes funny at the expense of relationships and at the expense of characters. The first one being when, I don't remember, what was Hela? When Hela killed, like, Thor's companions, like that, I was like, okay, those were really close to Thor throughout the first three movies, and I felt like they just did it like it was nothing in a form of comedy.
Like, you felt that way? Because it was interesting, because I didn't feel that sadness when those characters died.
I did.
I loved the idea of those characters. I totally understand where you're coming from, and I totally understand why people would have been sad when those characters died. But they were so underutilized in the first two movies, in my opinion. And I think that especially in
Mm-hmm.
2, that entire lineup of them, like, if you try and betray him, I will kill you.
Yeah.
As funny as that moment is, like, every single time they had it with Loki, I still had no connection with those characters.
Interesting. Yeah.
They're thoroughly enjoyable. I totally get why people like them. I totally get it. But when they died, I was like, okay, now we can move on.
Which is interesting because I had the exact opposite, where I was like, we're moving on already. Like, those were his closest friends.
Yeah, you guys have been through so much together. Like,
and then they're dead.
But if we have to, like, really think about it, Thor at the time definitely didn't know about it. And I think why I enjoyed being the the word that could be better phrased. Enjoyed being the word that can be rephrased at any point.
Finally.
The reason why I enjoyed Hela's first interactions on Asgard is because she didn't take them seriously, is because she was an actual threat and she knew it. And she didn't know who these people were, you know? So why spend the time to go over these characters' deaths, you know, when she doesn't know who these people are?
Well,
and if we're being honest, I can't name all of them.
Oh, I can't either.
I don't know who they are either.
No.
So I think that's why they were able, in my opinion, for me anyway, to move past that friendship barrier. Because even Thor in the first 2 movies for me did not feel like he had any real, like, connections between them. His strongest connection has always been with Loki for me. And if they put half of the energy into explaining that friendship was similar to Loki and Thor's relationship, I would have had more of a heartbreaking moment when they died. But because they never evolved those stories for me, I couldn't relate.
Interesting.
You know? They had a weird love triangle at one point between Jane Foster and what was her name? I forget. She wasn't even in the third one.
Yeah.
It was like they had that weird love triangle moment for a second there, but like it was never really acted on at any point, you know?
Yeah.
So it was just like I didn't have a strong connection between those characters, and I respected their decision to move past those characters' deaths relatively quickly and kind of comedically. Because again, Hela has no idea who these people are. She doesn't know anybody on Asgard at this point, you know, because nobody knows who she is. So
what were you gonna say, Tessa? I think I interrupted you by accident.
Yeah, I forgot.
So I'm sorry.
I'll remember it later.
Yeah.
So that was the first one you had.
Well, that, and I understand. I understand from what you're saying, like why they did it for the sake of she doesn't care about them, and I think it was more I didn't need her to care about them. I understood how she killed them, but like it was in how it was like how much they focused camera-wise, I guess, on them, or like lingered on them. It felt like it was nothing, and I get that it was nothing to her, but it felt like in terms of for the story, it was just like, all right, they're dead, goodbye. And I get that you know, I can't name all of them either, but I understood what they, you know, I understand what they mean to Thor.
I know one of them is Zachary Levi.
Yeah.
But he's Shazam now, so
he's
Shazam,
matter. Right. The other thing was, and I think these are scenes that you really liked, Megan, which is what's funny. So like, all right, you know the scene where they have Loki tied up, and then Thor is like
throws something at him.
Not that. That was funny.
But that was good.
It wasn't. No, I liked that. But it was when he was talking to Valkyrie, and he was like, you know, one time when we were 7, he turned into a snake, bit me, and I was like, all right, by itself, that's funny, but in connection to the story, makes no sense. Like that. Like, all right, from a young age, like to me, that set up like from a young age, there was like this almost deadly rivalry, but they had already set up that it was like a big betrayal at the end of Thor. And so what I mean by like they sacrifice stuff for comedy is not just character deaths, but I felt like it almost seemed like they changed the dynamics of characters and changed the backstory and how they treated each other in other movies
I think that,
for
honestly,
the sake of comedy. And
yeah,
that was what bothered me, that it felt like
Mm-hmm.
it felt like a departure with it felt like a complete departure, which I understand why they did it, but I don't agree with it personally.
I totally respect that sentiment and that feeling. I have the opposite.
Yeah.
I think it deepens there. I honestly, in my opinion, those little moments, for me, that the scene with Get Help, you know, all of that, in my opinion, like, strengthened their relationship more. Because I think it actually created a familial bond. Because, like I said before, I feel like in Thor and Thor: The Dark World, there wasn't there was that, like, they said that they were brothers, you know, and there were moments, you know, but they weren't trained at a young age to hate each other. Like, even in the first one, they weren't trained to hate each other, you know. Like, when we saw them as little kids, they loved each other. And I wanted more of those moments. I wanted more of that inner conflict with Thor and his brother, because Thor sacrifices so much in every single encounter he has with Loki, you know, where he's just like, I will literally sacrifice myself to prove that you can be a good person. That's what Thor does, and he'll do anything to protect his brother. It's like established throughout every single movie they have together, right? But for me, it was just like, all I'm getting are these serious ones. It's like, okay, they fought in battle together, whatever, we get that. It's like but we don't know anything about their brother relationship. So that entire, like, thing with Loki where he's actually a god of mischief and pulling pranks on his brother, and his brother remembers those moments, is so funny to me. And the fact that they had an interaction where they actually had to get help before that moment,
I like that moment,
is funny to me, because then it just strengthens the fact that they do have history together. And I think that's why I enjoyed it more. But I totally get why you think it was like why it was like sacrificing that relationship.
And I, like, pranks are one thing, but, like, when he's saying he stabbed me several times, I was like, what? I was like, this seems like a blooper moment. And there were a lot of moments in the movie where I was like, this seems like it was in the bloopers and they just added, which, all right, haha. Okay. And then I also kind of, I think the moment when, like, I can pinpoint the moment I was, like, over it and kind of done with the movie mentally. It was when Valkyrie was like, oh, you mean the devil's anus? I was like, I'm done. I was like, I'm done. I was like, this is. I had hope up until that moment, and then all right, I'm good.
Yeah.
What about you, Tess?
Interesting.
Yeah, this is really interesting.
Okay, Lucas, have you read the comics before seeing the movies?
No.
Yeah, me either. Which is interesting because, Megan, have you read the comics beforehand?
I've read quite a few comics with Thor in it, not solo Thor movies. And Thor, to me, even in the comics, is not super serious. Here's an example. It's like completely different from anything, and it ties into what they're doing with the Loki series, which I'm super excited about. There's this comic book where Loki is running for president. Now, obviously super funny, obviously super stupid. Okay, but that, like, should establish where we're at with how they should view Thor in these moments. Now, Thor does show up, but it isn't the Thor that we know. It's the goddess Thor.
Okay.
It is when Thor becomes a woman instead of a man, you know? But it is still, like, seriously funny because how it happens is it's from the review of a reporter, I believe. Okay. And Thor, like, knocks on the door, and when she opens the door, there's Thor, and they drew, like, lightning coming off of her. And that, like, just kind of establishes Thor, I think, honestly, as, like, Thor is kind of comedic, and I think that the drama in it is what the comedy is, you know? It's kind of like how you can laugh at soap operas, in my opinion.
For sure, yeah.
Where they're so dramatic, they're so stupidly funny, you know? I feel like that's what they were trying to do with this, because that is how, personally, I have seen a few Thor moments in the comic books, where he's so overly dramatic that you have to laugh at him. And I think that that's what they were going for with Thor Ragnarok, honestly.
Yeah. That's interesting. So,
I think
because for me, it was just seeing like the movies was like my first introduction to Thor. So I had like no previous like idea of what the Marvel was, or like that a bunch of comics had already existed about these characters. So going in with like no expectations, and then having that those first two movies like establish him as serious, and then this like Ragnarok was like not like what Lucas was saying, like a huge shift in tone. So it kind of like threw me off.
I do have a question as we wrap this episode up then. Is if you can detach the first two every Thor movie that came before this, whatever he was in before, if you can detach Ragnarok from the MCU and it be its own movie, you know, you still know all the information about Thor and what he's doing, you know, but just to detach it from the movies that he's already been established in, would you have enjoyed this movie more? I ask this because personally I would still enjoy it. Taika Waititi, in my opinion, is a fucking genius.
Oh yeah.
I think he's so funny, and if you've seen like What We Do in the Shadows, it is his humor that shines through.
Watch Jojo Rabbit.
I love him so much.
100%.
So like myself, I love the movie with the MCU, but I can still love the movie even if it wasn't attached to the MCU. You know what I'm saying? So is there that feeling for you guys?
I feel like maybe I would have enjoyed it more if it wasn't a part of the MCU, just like its own separate thing.
Yeah,
buddy cop movie. You know?
Yeah. The MCU makes me think like, okay, they're gonna go up against this huge battle. It's gonna be epic and intense. There will be like some comedic moments, but not like throughout the entirety of it. So, yeah, if it was detached, I think I would enjoy it a little more.
I think the big downfall for it was the way that Joss Whedon set up Ragnarok in Ultron. If you guys remember, that is when Ragnarok is first introduced, you know? And I think that it was going super, super intense, serious, like horror movie intense, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think kind of ruined the idea of what Ragnarok could have been. If they were possibly a little more skeptical about Ragnarok in general. I don't even think that they should have brought Ragnarok up, in my opinion, daring Ultron, because I don't think that was necessary, but I think that also kind of ruined it for people, because it set Ragnarok up to be super serious and like the way that Thor usually is, you know?
Yeah, I think definitely separate from the MCU, I would have really enjoyed it, and I love Taika Waititi. I think, you know, I don't want I don't want him to watch and be like, wow, he fucking hates my movie. God, fuck that guy.
He'd say that anyway.
Right.
But he'd do it more sarcastically.
No. Yeah, he would. Yeah, right. But yeah, I definitely agree that it was set up to be more serious than it was going to be, and I think that was a big part of my disappointment for it, because I think, you know, Tessa, you hit it on the head. A lot of people that liked it were people that were, you know, with the comics before it came out and knew how that character was separate from the MCU. And I understand why they did it. I think it was disappointing for me from a storytelling standpoint. A
storytelling standpoint on its own, or a storytelling standpoint
in connection
to the MCU?
In connection.
Okay.
Not on its own.
Because I think that those are two very different.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I think those are two very different, because story-wise, I think that on its own it's really good. I totally understand why in connection to the MCU people didn't like it.
Which it's hard for me not to look at it connected to the MCU, because I really, really value stories that are all interconnected and really thought out and really like full circle stuff that is all connected and that shares a tone that was purposeful. And so this shift in connection with the MC, it's hard for me not to, but on its own, I really liked. On its own, I would say I would have enjoyed it more, but it's hard for me not to connect it to the MCU because I think for me that's what made the MCU cool, was that you had all of these stories that were connected together and it still made up this much bigger whole. And so having that kind of distorted that view that I had of it.
Then I have a side question before we end this episode.
Yes.
Do you have the same feelings of the Guardians movies and Ant-Man movies in comparison with Thor Ragnarok? Because they lean more towards the way Ragnarok is told than other MCU ones.
No, but
For me,
I think...
yes.
Oh, you do? Okay, you do.
Tessa doesn't like them because they take away from the tone of the overall thing. Yeah.
I would say no.
Interesting. Something we'll have to talk about in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
When we touch on Guardians and Ant-Man.
Yes.
Yeah. Then I would be the odd man out.
Right. No, I would say no for the same reason. I would say no because it was introduced that way, and I would say that was why I didn't enjoy Ragnarok, is because in my mind it wasn't. So yeah, okay. I'll end that there, but yeah, that's okay. I think that's definitely a good point.
Well, I think that's really interesting topics.
Yeah.
I think it's good to know that you guys would enjoy the movie separated from the MCU. I think that's a clear point to make when we're talking about this, that the story on its own is funny and enjoyable. I don't want to trash the movie. Exactly, but in connection to the MCU is where you guys have your issues.
100%.
Okay, I can respect that. I'm still not changing the fact that I love this movie so much. We'll have to talk about the Thor movies, but I think we might have to move to the Guardians or Ant-Man next, because I'm very curious as to those ones for you guys compared to the to Thor. So you guys have any closing comments?
I'm curious to hear what our viewers think and feel as well, and if they agree or disagree with any of the points that we brought up. I'd like to open up the discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Please let us know what you guys thought of Thor Ragnarok in the comments, and where you guys rank it. Is it like a high rank or a low rank for you? Are you guys part of the small percentage that didn't like the movie, or in this case the large percentage? Let us know in the comments. But this has been the Viewers Club. My name is Megan.
My name is Tess.
And my name is Lucas.
And you all have a good.
Have a good, everyone.
You guys know that like half of the dialogue in Thor Ragnarok was pretty much improvised?
I got the sense.
Yeah.
Do you know this story? Do you guys know the story of he's a friend from work? You know that one?
No, I don't.
No.
So what happened is they had a kid from Make-A-Wish on set because he wanted to see a Thor movie getting made or wanted to be on set or something. And they were filming that scene. And then he yelled out to Hemsworth, and it's just like something along the lines of, he's a friend from work. And Hemsworth loved it. So he used that line and it stayed in the film. And honestly, I think that's the sweetest thing in the world.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, that's cute.
I think it's great.
I love that.